He's the father of my children. Probably masculine, jocular, fun husband came to me one day and with a very somber look on his face.
There are secrets that age with you. Secrets that sit in your chest for so long they become part of your heartbeat. Secrets that wake you up at 3 in the morning, decades after they were whispered to you in the dark. I've carried one of those secrets for 47 years. And tonight, at 76 years old, I'm going to break the promise I made to the man I loved. My name is Linda Thompson, and I need you to understand something before we go any further. I'm not someone who watched Elvis Presley from a distance.
San Francisco, so it's like the old song, I Left My Heart in San Francisco by Tony Bennett.
I'm not reconstructing events from interviews or tabloid clippings. I was there. For 4.5 years, from 1972 to 1976, I lived with that man. I held him when he couldn't sleep. I saw him at his strongest and his most broken. I knew things about Elvis that he didn't share with anyone else. Not his family, not his Memphis Mafia, not even Priscilla. And one night in 1975, in the bedroom at Graceland, when his breathing was labored and his body was failing him in ways he couldn't explain to the doctors, he gripped my hand and made me swear something. His exact words, and I remember them like he spoke them yesterday, were, "Linda, if I don't make it, promise me you'll never let them say it was the pills. Promise me." I promised. Of course I promised. When the man you love is terrified and vulnerable and asking you to protect him, you'd promise him anything. But here's what I've learned in the years since he left us. Elvis made me promise to protect him from one specific lie. He never made me promise to stay silent while 1,000 other lies were built on top of his grave. He never asked me to watch his memory be twisted, his truth be buried, his daughter be traumatized by false narratives. He asked me to protect him from being called a drug addict. He didn't ask me to let the world believe every other distortion that's been sold as truth. And that's the position I've been in for nearly 50 years. Honoring a promise while watching that promise be weaponized to create something Elvis would have hated. Staying quiet while people who weren't there, people who left years before his death, spoke with absolute authority about his final years. Watching the man I knew, the real man, disappear under layers of convenient mythology. I've wrestled with this. God knows I've wrestled with it. I've asked myself 1,000 times, what does loyalty mean when the person you're being loyal to can't defend themselves anymore? What does a promise mean when keeping it actually betrays the spirit of what was asked? For years, I told myself that silence was the loving choice. That speaking would make me just another person exploiting Elvis's name. That the best thing I could do was let him rest in peace and not add to the noise. I watched others write their books, give their interviews, build their brands on his memory, and I stayed quiet. But then Lisa Marie died, and I watched the same patterns repeat. I watched people who weren't there speak for her. I watched her truth be questioned, her testimony be dismissed, her pain be rewritten. I watched her fight right up until the end to make people understand what it was like to be Elvis Presley's daughter in a world that thought it knew her father better than she did. And I realized my silence isn't protecting Elvis anymore. It's protecting the lies. It's enabling the very thing he begged me to prevent. Because when you stay quiet while falsehoods spread, you become complicit in them. Your silence becomes their permission. I'm 76 years old now. I don't have forever to make this right. And I've decided that keeping a promise to a dead man is less important than telling the truth for everyone who's still trying to understand what actually happened. For Lisa Marie's memory. For the fans who deserve to know the real story. For Elvis himself. Because I think if he could see what's been done to his legacy, he'd release me from that promise in a heartbeat. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you the secret Elvis made me swear to protect. And then I'm going to tell you everything else. The context, the medical reality, the systematic failure, the people who should have spoken up and didn't. I'm going to tell you what those final years were actually like. Not the tabloid version, not the tragic drug addict king narrative. The truth. And if that makes me a promise breaker, so be it. Because I'd rather break a promise to Elvis than continue betraying his memory with my silence. He trusted me with his truth. It's time I trusted the world with it too. The night Elvis told me the truth, the real truth about what was happening to his body, we were alone at Graceland. It was late, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. He'd been in pain for hours, not the kind of pain you take a pill for and it goes away. The kind of pain that makes a grown man cry, the kind that doesn't stop. He looked at me and I could see the fear in his eyes. Not fear of death exactly, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being remembered wrong. And he said something I'll never forget. They're going to say I did this to myself. When I'm gone, they're going to make it simple. They're going to say the pills killed me. But Linda, that's not what's happening. My body is destroying itself, and the pills are the only thing keeping me alive enough to be Elvis. Let me tell you what Elvis was actually dealing with, what the doctors either missed or ignored or didn't care enough to properly diagnose. Elvis had a genetic condition, inherited from his mother's side, that affected his digestive system, his colon, his entire internal function. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of thing that showed up in a single test. It was the kind of condition that slowly, relentlessly breaks your body down from the inside. On top of that, he developed severe autoimmune issues. His body was literally attacking itself. He'd wake up with joints so swollen he could barely move. He had chronic inflammation in his intestines that made eating agony. He suffered from what we now recognize as a form of irritable bowel syndrome so severe it caused him to black out from pain. His colon was essentially failing, and this wasn't happening at the end. This started in his early 30s and just got progressively worse. But here's the thing about being Elvis Presley in the 1970s. You don't get real medical care. You get yes men in white coats. You get doctors who are so starstruck they'll prescribe whatever you ask for just to stay in your orbit. You get people who are more interested in being able to say they're Elvis's doctor than actually diagnosing what's killing him. Elvis went to multiple doctors. He described his symptoms. He begged for answers. And what did they tell him? Stress. You're stressed, Elvis. It's the touring. It's the pressure. Take these pills for the pain. Take these pills to sleep. Take these pills to wake up. Take these pills to perform. They treated symptoms. They never treated the cause because they never properly looked for the cause. And the medications they prescribed? They weren't street drugs. They weren't recreational. Every single pill Elvis took was prescribed by a licensed physician for a legitimate medical purpose. He had pills for pain management because his body was in constant, unrelenting pain. He had pills for sleep because when you're in that much pain, your body won't let you rest. He had pills for energy because when you haven't slept, and you're dying inside but you still have to walk on stage in front of 20,000 people and be Elvis Presley, you need something to keep you functional. Was it dependency? Yes, absolutely. But dependency and addiction are not the same thing, and this is where the world has gotten it catastrophically wrong. Addiction is psychological. It's about chasing a high, escaping reality, destroying your life for a substance. Dependency is physical. It's your body needing medication to manage a condition. And when that condition is chronic, progressive, and untreated, the dependency isn't weakness, it's survival. Elvis knew the difference. He tried to explain it to people. He'd say, "I'm not getting high. I'm trying not to die." But nobody wanted to hear that. It was easier to see the pills and make assumptions. It was simpler to call him an addict than to confront the systemic medical failure that was happening right in front of everyone. Do you want to know why Elvis's appearance changed so dramatically in those final years? It wasn't the pills, it was the illness. The autoimmune condition caused massive fluid retention. The colon issues meant his body couldn't process nutrients properly, so he'd swing between gaining weight uncontrollably and losing it just as fast. His face would swell. His body would bloat. And everyone looked at him and thought, drugs. They saw the physical manifestation of disease and called it addiction. And the canceled shows? The performances where he seemed out of it? Those weren't because he was high. Those were because he was literally dying on stage and still trying to give people what they came for. There were nights when he was in so much pain he could barely stand. But he'd take whatever medication he needed to get through those 90 minutes because in his mind, disappointing his fans was worse than destroying his body. The tragedy isn't that Elvis took pills. The tragedy is that Elvis needed pills to manage conditions that were never properly treated. The tragedy is that he had access to every doctor in America, and not one of them cared enough to figure out what was actually wrong. The tragedy is that he died at 42 from complications that might have been manageable if anyone had been treating the disease instead of just masking the symptoms. Elvis wasn't killing himself. His body was betraying him, and the medical establishment failed him completely. And then after he was gone, those same doctors and those same systems pointed at the pill bottles and said, "See, addict, case closed." But the case was never closed, because the man was dying slowly in agony, trying desperately to keep being Elvis for a world that needed him to be superhuman. And that's not addiction. That's tragedy on a scale most people can't even comprehend. That's the secret Elvis asked me never to share, not because he was ashamed, but because he knew nobody would understand. He knew they'd make it simple when it was anything but. The drug narrative became the official story within hours of Elvis's death, and I need you to understand why. Not because it was true, but because it was convenient. It was convenient for everyone except Elvis. For the doctors, the drug story was a shield. If Elvis died from addiction, from self-destructive behavior, from his own choices, then they weren't responsible for missing the diagnosis. They weren't accountable for years of inadequate care. They weren't liable for prescribing medications without ever addressing the underlying conditions. The narrative protected them. It always has. For the people around him, the managers, the handlers, the enablers, the drug story explained why they didn't intervene. If Elvis was an addict, then he was unreachable. He was impossible to save. They could say they tried, that addiction is a disease, that there was nothing anyone could do. It absolved them of the guilt they should have carried for letting him deteriorate while they profited from his name. And for the media, the public, the world at large, the drug story was simple. It fit into a narrative everyone already understood. Tragic celebrity, too much too soon. The price of fame. It was a morality tale wrapped in a bow. People could shake their heads, say what a waste, and move on without having to confront the uncomfortable truth that a man was failed by every system that should have protected him. But here's where it gets truly infuriating. The person who's spoken most authoritatively about Elvis's drug addiction is Priscilla. And Priscilla divorced Elvis in 1973. She moved to California. She started her new life. From 1973 until Elvis's death in August 1977, she was not there. She wasn't living at Graceland. She wasn't in Memphis. She wasn't present for the day-to-day reality of those final 4 years. Those 4 years, the exact years she speaks most confidently about, she observed from a distance, if at all. She'd see Elvis during custody exchanges with Lisa Marie. She'd hear things secondhand. She'd see photos in magazines, but she didn't see him at 3 in the morning doubled over in pain. She didn't watch him try to eat and have to stop because his body couldn't handle it. She didn't live the medical nightmare that was his daily existence. I did. I was there. I held him through it. And I'm telling you, what she's described for 47 years is not what happened. It's a version of events that serves a narrative but abandons the truth. And I understand why the lie persisted. I do. The truth is complicated. The truth requires you to understand medical conditions, systemic failure, the difference between dependency and addiction. The truth doesn't fit on a magazine cover or in a 2-minute news segment. The truth makes people uncomfortable because it means we all failed him, not just Elvis failing himself. But the cost of that convenient lie has been astronomical. It cost Elvis his legacy. Instead of being remembered as a man who fought through unimaginable physical suffering to keep performing, he's remembered as a cautionary tale about excess. Instead of being seen as someone who needed and deserved proper medical care, he's seen as someone who made bad choices. And it cost Lisa Marie. It cost her dearly because she grew up hearing that her father was an addict. She internalized that. She fought against it. She struggled with her own demons while carrying the weight of a false narrative about the man she loved more than anyone in the world. And when she tried to tell her truth, when she tried to correct the record, people dismissed her. They used the same logic they used on her father. Troubled family, addiction issues, can't trust what they say. I watched Lisa Marie fight that battle until the day she died, and I stayed silent. I honored my promise to Elvis, and I let his daughter drown in the consequences of a lie. That ends now. They made Elvis a drug addict to avoid admitting they failed him. They made it his fault so they wouldn't have to carry theirs, and I've watched that distortion become history. But I was there, and I'm still here. And the truth matters more than comfort, it always has. So if Elvis didn't want to be remembered as an addict, what did he want? Because that matters. That matters more than anything I've said so far. Elvis wanted you to know that he never stopped loving what he did, even when his body was failing. Even when getting out of bed took more strength than most people use in a week. Even when the pain was so intense he could barely think straight, he loved performing. He loved his fans. He loved being able to give people joy, even if it cost him everything. There were nights when I'd beg him not to go on stage. I'd see how much he was suffering and I'd say, "Elvis, cancel it. Tell them you're sick. Nobody would blame you." And he'd look at me with those eyes, those incredibly sad, incredibly determined eyes, and he'd say, "Linda, those people bought tickets. They got babysitters. They drove hours to see me. I can't let them down. I won't." That was who he was, not the man who couldn't control himself. Not the tragic figure spiraling into oblivion. He was a man who understood what he meant to people, and he refused to break that sacred trust between performer and audience, even when it was literally killing him. He wanted you to know how much he loved Lisa Marie. God, he loved that little girl. She was everything to him. He'd talk about her constantly when she wasn't there. He'd light up when she arrived. And his greatest fear, the thing that haunted him more than death itself, was that she'd grow up thinking he didn't care enough to fight, that she'd believe he chose pills over her, that she'd think he gave up. He didn't give up. His body gave out. There's a difference, and it's a difference that would have meant everything to Lisa Marie if the world had understood it. Instead, she spent her life defending a father who was already fighting the hardest battle of his life just to stay present for her. Elvis wanted you to know he was grateful. He'd say it all the time. "I can't believe people still care. I can't believe they still show up." Even at the end, even when he could barely recognize himself in the mirror, he was grateful for every single person who loved him. He never took it for granted. He never felt entitled to it. He carried the weight of that love like a responsibility, and he tried with everything he had to be worthy of it. And here's what he wanted most. He wanted to be remembered as human, not perfect, not a god, not an untouchable icon. Just a man who was given an extraordinary gift, who worked his whole life to honor that gift, and who kept going even when everything in his body was screaming at him to stop. He was self-aware. People think he was in denial, that he didn't understand what was happening to him. That's not true. He knew. He knew his time was running out. He knew his body was failing in ways medicine couldn't fix. He just refused to let that be the story. He refused to spend his final years being pitied or treated like he was already gone. So he kept performing. He kept showing up. He kept being Elvis, even when being Elvis required more than any human should have to give. And that's not addiction. That's not weakness. That's heroic. That's a level of dedication and love that most people can't even comprehend. I broke my promise tonight, Elvis. I told them what you asked me not to tell. But I did it because staying silent was making the lie permanent. I did it because you deserved better. Because Lisa Marie deserved better. Because the truth, no matter how complicated, is always more loving than a comfortable fiction. I hope wherever you are, you understand. I hope you forgive me. And I hope that finally, after 47 years, people will see you the way you actually were, not the way it was convenient to remember you. You were human, you were hurting, you were fighting, and you never ever stopped loving the people who loved you back. That's the legacy you earned, and that's the legacy I'm fighting for now. If you believe Elvis Presley deserves to be remembered for who he truly was, a man who fought through unimaginable suffering to keep giving the world his gift, then share this story. The truth has been buried for 47 years. Help me give the king the legacy he actually earned. Subscribe to this channel and let's make sure his real story, the one he couldn't tell himself, finally gets heard. Truth matters. Elvis matters. Let's honor both.